All right, we're coming in hot into our Facebook group here. Let me just turn off my sound if I can. Doesn't look like it's going to let me. All right, I'm going to come back to Zoom. Welcome, everyone. I am back here again for an inspirational interview with the fabulous Chloe Rachel Gallaway, who I've interviewed here before, and it's timely that we have you back. So welcome back, Chloe.
Thank you, Hannah. Yay. I'm so glad we just started chatting about this topic we're talking about today. I think it's so important. Yeah, so I'm super happy to be here and see everybody.
Yay. Well, let me introduce you for folks who might not know, might not have been introduced to you prior. And I have your little bio here I'm going to read. And this conversation came out of a post that I made, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So Chloe is a story medicine coach, and she has been leading transformational book writing retreats for more than 7 years. Her unique approach to storytelling and writing is an invitation into a sacred journey, one that will nourish your mind, body, and spirit while you learn to write your story. With an invitation into understanding medicine story medicine, Chloe leads her aspiring writers to knowing how to connect. Writing is about connection, first with ourselves and then with our audience. The pathway to empowerment as a writer is connecting to your intuitive voice, combined with learning the craft of storytelling. Chloe is a master at both craft and intuitive process for writers. So excited to have you back here. And our conversation today is just going to flow. So those of you that are joining us, we opted to go through Zoom instead of StreamYard. So if you are with us on our Facebook page, feel free to chime in, and I'm going to pull it up on my phone so I can see if any comments come in and we can respond to those. So feel free to join our conversation. Yes. So today's conversation is really about story as medicine. And the conversation, the invitation that I had put out was, what would you like to see more of here? What are you interested in engaging with? And will you talk about what your response was to that? And
yeah, I mean, I will just first say I love your work. I love your yoga, and then the Ayurvedic add in. And I'm not always available, as being so busy myself. I'm a full-time coach and I have 2 children. So my life has got a lot of moving pieces, kind of like your life too. So we have a lot of things in common. And then just growing up so connected to nature, and living in the wilderness. And you're not exactly in the wilderness, but I love where you live and how you share your life, Hannah. So, so I just, I want to say that it's just a pleasure to connect with you and your audience, because I imagine that a lot of people feel this way. And just your pictures and the pictures of the sunset and the land, all that is just such rich connection for me. And so, so I love everything that you do. But the thing that came up for me was just how much anxiety in the last, it's just been more anxiety. I don't know if it's nailed down to 2 years, or, but it definitely, pandemic. Like it's increased in the last couple of years. Right. So like my own anxiety, and I do a lot of work with healing the narrative and healing story and understanding emotion. So I know when I have the feelings of anxiety, or when I have the feelings of depression, or the subtle difference between feeling melancholy and feeling depressed. Like there's all these variations of emotion, and I'm very in touch with them, but I'm not removed from them. Right. Just because I work in the healing field and I do what I call story medicine, which we'll talk about more, does not mean that I am removed from all of that. Right. Because we're all just in a human experience. And anxiety is just that, like, if we feel the vibration of anxiety, it feels like sort of turbulence on an airplane to me. Right. I hate turbulence on airplanes, by the way. I just had 3 flights recently, and the last one from Denver to New Mexico was like this the whole time. And I was like, it's a spiritual journey for me. It's like, I am just surrendering, because when you're on an airplane, you do not have control, right? So it is a really great example of like, oh, wow, the anxiety release is coming up for me. And I'm like, but what is in the present moment? So staying connected to the present moment. Well, if I check the present moment, I'm still alive. I am okay. It's the thoughts about not being okay, right, that are creating my sweaty hands and this anxiety happening, right? So, but we can have that throughout our day and at any points in our life, right? So that's why for me, learning more about what you do and how it can help us through anxiety, help us calm the nervous system. And I know you probably have answers to this, and you've probably done some of this, right? But for me, it was like the most important question. So.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love the tie-in to the stories that we tell about ourselves and about the world. And I also just want to honor, that you're speaking to an experience that you are having, and it's pretty universal. Like, if anybody's aware of what's going on in the world, how could we not struggle with some anxiety? How could we not struggle with some depression? And I really see anxiety and depression as 2 sides of the same coin. Some people separate them and be like, either you're anxious or you're depressed. Most of us that have a full range of human emotions will experience both, and that it can kind of flip back and forth. If we identify that we are experiencing some anxiety, there's probably also an awareness that we experience some depression in our lives. And I think what's really important is for us to acknowledge that those emotions or experiences are not wrong or bad, and they're not necessarily things that we want to go poof, you don't exist. And this is part of our culture that is like, just take an anti-anxiety drug or an antidepressant, and then it kind of mellows you out. Like, your highs aren't as high and your lows aren't as low. And I've been there. I've done avoidance.
Or just, let's avoid, right? Like technology is a great tool. And I'm being a child that literally grew up in the wilderness and had no TV and no phone and none of that. Like, what a privy to be able to connect with all these people. And like, for me, some days it really is like a miracle when I think back to my first 12 years. Right, I can just hop on here and I'm talking to you and people are listening, right? I mean, it's amazing.
How crazy.
However, it can be a real crutch, it can be a real avoidance. And we could make just a huge long list, and everybody in the audience, you can make a list of all the ways that you're avoiding your feelings. And depression and anxiety, right? These are wrapped in emotion, right? And affect both the nervous system and the brain, right? And so it's this whole process going on. So quick fixes, medication. I mean, I'm not completely against it, but I think I'm with you.
No, I'm not either.
Right. We're not against it, but what we're saying is there's a much bigger picture here, and we need to understand that picture for true health and true awareness, right? So that we can be back in our power with these things that we're dealing with, depression, anxiety, and if we wanted to really get into emotion, there's just so many, right? But not running from it.
Right. So honoring it. Yeah. So I want to point out, for those of you who don't know, that Chloe wrote this amazing book. If you haven't read it yet, it's called The Soulful Child, 12 Years in the Wilderness. Do you have a copy of it there to share? Yay!
Can't you see from the hair? Look at, see, this is the wild. This is me on the cover of the wild hair. Now, my hair was probably not combed for like, a week or so there, but now this is combed, people. This is combed now.
So yes, and so Chloe did grow up off the grid, totally in the wilderness, with parents who had decided basically to leave culture. And so that that in and of itself, I mean, I love that we're having this conversation right now, because yes, that shift from like your early life where, I mean, we're around the same age. I know, we didn't get a computer in our home until I was 16.
Mhm.
So like some things of being, in our 40s at this time, there were, technological things shifting. And, I look at our children now who are technology natives. They can't imagine not having, cell phones or internet or access to learning anything that they might possibly think of at any moment.
Mhm.
And along with that, it's like recognize, I mean, most people will never have the experience that you had of in the first 12 years of your life, right? Where like your whole world was what you could see, feel, taste, touch, and smell, right?
Yeah, all the
And
senses always
right,
involved, and intuition
yeah,
grounded all the time,
right,
at the level of awareness and connection, right? Because we even know that like walking up on the earth, like if you're barefoot, especially, which I did a lot of
right,
as a child, grounds you and grounds your system, right? So
yes,
there's just so many things there, but we are definitely living in a whole different era and a different
yeah,
experience, all of us, right? Even though my
yes,
life is an extreme example that I think can be used as
right,
a lesson. I think everybody's life can be
yeah,
used as a lesson, and that's kind of what story medicine offers.
yeah, yeah. So talk to us a little bit about like, I think what is ultimately healing for us um is recognition of what is true and moving towards what we know feels good, and in like the most true authentic way, not like,
Yeah.
well, it feels good to eat a pint of ice cream, or it feels good to zone out on social media for 2 hours, like really like good in the most nourishing sense.
Well, I'm guessing if you're really in touch with your feelings, those things actually don't feel good.
Right,
So the
right,
first thing is to understand yourself and your emotions and be connected enough to know what feeling good is. Like
right,
knowing the difference. Like I'm very aware of the difference of what really feels good to me, right? Like
mm-hmm,
walking barefoot in my backyard at sunset,
mm-hmm,
because that particular light, right? Is just like ingrained in my bones from childhood, because I played outside and I played outside. And when we came in was when the sun was gone.
right,
That's when we came inside. Right. So we didn't have a clock, and we didn't have a clock. So there was no
yeah,
like keeping track of this time other than nature and the sun. Right. And I know Ayurvedic follows a lot of this. That's what I love about
yeah,
it, because it's a very real thing to come into your body and be grounded in your body, in your mind, and spirit, I believe. Right. Because we
yeah,
are spiritual beings. Right. So even knowing what actually truly feels good, right?
yeah,
And reconnecting to that. And a lot of us are just kind of on autopilot, and we're just kind of being, going down the river and not aware, I don't think, of what feels good and what doesn't. And then we're just bumping up against anxiety and depression, and these things are bumping us all the time. And what do we do with that? Right?
mm-hmm, yeah,
Coming back in to creating that connection, which I think is a big part of your work, Hannah, right? Like you're saying, we
mm-hmm,
can do this through food as medicine,
mm-hmm,
right? We can do this as sacred experience as medicine, right?
mm-hmm,
And so I also believe those things are so vital. And then one of my big things is writing as a tool, because writing brings us into stillness. Like
yeah,
it brings us into the moment. And that's one of the big things that I coach on, because many of the writers
mm-hmm,
that come to me are, they're in the same situation we all are, right? Like we're moving so quickly, where we have the clock, we know the time, we're always moving with the time, right? And until we can surrender back into a sacred place, it's very
yeah,
hard to know what actually feels good and what really feels bad, and that we have some power, and actually, some power and choice over this. It's not just
mm-hmm,
we are at the mercy, even with this decade and this era and the movement of technology and the crisis that's going on, which has made things more difficult.
yeah,
But that's the power of the challenge and the tragedy and the difficulty, right? Which I could speak very highly to, having survived a lot of trauma, is that it is
mm,
the soil ground for listening.
Yeah.
It is the soil ground for making change, for surrendering to I will learn. I will listen.
Mm-hmm.
I will make this change. However, and maybe it means working with somebody like you, or maybe it means working with somebody like me, or all these other, there's so many healers out in the world now
Yeah.
that it's so inspiring to me. I could cry, because I'm like,
Yeah.
as much fear as there is, I'm like, we got this. We got this, right? Just do your part. We got this.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day about how like the we could say like masculine feminine energy, so like masculine energy, and this isn't pertaining specific, like we all have, whether we are embodied here as the masculine or feminine, we all have masculine and feminine energy within us, and that the masculine energy has been what we have prized in our culture and then have pushed out to the rest of the world. That's like big, showy, accomplish things, war,
Yep.
like force.
Yes.
And not the softer, more gentle, receptive, kind, soothing, and healing energy. And it will always be the case. This is what this podcast was talking about, that it will always be the case that masculine energy will be louder, because the feminine energy of the healing isn't loud.
Yeah, it's like a whisper.
It's soft. And it's the whispers of the truth in our own hearts when we get quiet enough, when we take the moment to be like, what is my truth? What is the thing? I mean, so yeah, just listening to you talk, even just getting in touch with, say, authentic hunger. Like this is something that I help a lot of women do, because food is always available to us, because food has been taught to us to be a crutch or a soothing thing. We've gone to it for that feminine energy amidst the masculine pressure.
Yes.
What can help calm me? Well, we want sweet taste because it's grounding. We want salty because it's exciting. We want things that help us feel alive,
right,
connected in our bodies. And yet that's not authentic hunger. Authentic hunger is about nourishing our physical organism to allow us to have all these other experiences. And if we're pushing it down with, here we are back to, welcoming the emotions, welcoming what is showing up. And if we're pushing it down with eating all the time, forget it. Like we can't
everything
actually
just
show up.
comes back up, right? So that's where anxiety, I think. So there's anxiety that can come from the past, where we're dealing with like emotional. I deal a lot with emotional memory. So the memory is triggering, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the present that we're living, and those things can bump up against the past. So there's all these energy bodies, right? That's why understanding energy is so profound, because the energy, like Einstein said, everything is energy. Right. And so imagine that all these energies are just bumping, right? But whatever you suppress, right, we know it comes back up. And one form that it really comes up in is anxiety. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like a trickle, it's like a bubble, or you get bumped and all of a sudden you're hit, and then it's harder to recover, and it's harder to calm the nervous system. Right. So this is why it's so important to have authentic hunger.
Yeah.
Authentic connection. Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, writing is about connection. Like there's a lot of people that have come to work with me, and initially they were like, well, I'm not a writer. And it's just an interesting thing that we think, well, I'm not a writer. Well, no, we don't start out like we're born writers. I mean, we have that thought, I think, about that particular art form is like, I'm born a writer, and
or
maybe,
an artist, same
or
thing
an artist.
I mean,
right?
that was my background.
All of that.
Yeah.
Or anything that you really want to be, to be honest, like you actually may be born that, but be disconnected from it. Like, I think a huge thing, if we're going to talk about connection and getting in touch with what's real and what's authentic, is like all the barriers that have blocked you from really being in connection with who you really are. Right.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what we call Dharma. Like, what are you here for? It's not a mistake that you're embodied in this lifetime. What are you here for? Right. And if we start having that conversation of like, you're not just here to consume, right? You're here for some reason. And what is it that you are here for? To share, to give, to implement, to inspire, what is, and not every, we're not all here to do it in the same way. And
Yes.
that Dharma piece is so, so important. And so as we discover that, that's a big piece to, I think, finding more peace in our lives, is when we feel like we're living an existence of purpose.
Absolutely.
I
I mean,
suspect you feel that.
that can ground you back in place, I think, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
of course, having purpose and coming back into the purpose is huge. But
Yes.
so let's talk a
Will
little bit.
you?
I would love to give people just a tool of understanding a little bit around their story. And then
I was going to ask if you could talk more about story medicine stories. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, just a quick example, right? So for people that see this video, your story is living in you all the time, right? We have this narrative that's verbal and that is in our heads and in the way we feel about our story. But all of that really embodies a lot of energy, actually. And whether you realize it or not, this energy is living in your body. And it's actually, it's part of your choices. It's part of the way you feel. It's part of your living experience. The story is stored in the whole body. Right. So I've really, really come to know that, through helping people to write their story and leading them through this process. So one quick example, right, is we can get in touch with just the idea of the energies that are there. Okay. And so I'm going to give an example, and an easy way to do this is if you just get like a pen and paper and you do like a 1 to 5. Okay. And I try to tighten it down with like 5 energies. So there's usually 5 energies that are like heavier or darker. They're like the pain body of our story. And then there are 5 that are like lighter, so you could simply look at it as the light and dark, right? Which encompasses so much of the human experience, right? And so if you just do those two, the light and the dark, you'll start to see the different energies. And all of those energies are really part of your story, and they're working in you. And now that's a huge process to write through that and understand it deeper, right? But just having awareness and a sense of it can be very powerful. Okay. So I'm going to lead everybody through minds, my 5 dark and my 5 light. And these are the 5 that encompass the soulful child, right? So when we write like emotionally connected in an emotionally compelling way, the energy is infused in the story. And that is where we really change people's lives. It's not a book about information. It's a book that transforms, right? So the energies of the soulful child, for example, and they're usually in juxtaposition of one another. Okay. So the first one is grief, and the opposite is protection. And my protection really came from Mother Nature. And my grief, as you know from the story, many traumas, my brother died, a lot of different grief in my early years. But the protection was just as profound. Okay, so the second emotion is loss. And even though this sounds similar, words have vibration, right? So understanding and really coming into the energy of the words that encompass your story is a powerful thing to do. So loss is another huge theme in my story. And the opposite of the loss is unconditional love. Start to feel like if you can get in touch with that, right? How I could be totally fixated on the loss, but if I get in touch with the unconditional love, it's almost like, oh my God, I can come into wholeness no matter how bad the loss was, right? And then the third one for me is trauma. And the opposite of that is wisdom. So like moving through all the different traumas in my story, really what I was doing was I was seeing all the wisdom like that just grew in me from that. And most people that come to write story, that's an experience for them, is they start to experience the opposite of the trauma. And it's quite profound. And then the fourth one is anger. And the opposite of the anger in my story is forgiveness. And the fifth one is fear. And the opposite is courage. And literally, right? Can you it's literally a list. It's like a list of 10 energies, and all those encompass this story. So if people just start by making a list and they start to feel, and then they can just get in touch a little bit with like, well, where am I leaning toward? And am I leaning toward the grief? Well, it's very important actually that we be in grief and that we express grief and that we get through it. So if there's a lot calling you toward grief, it's just that you haven't given it voice probably. And the same for all the emotions, right, that are on the darker side. The thing is, they need to be resolved and shifted and moved, and they can be resolved through a experience, just like being in an experience with you, Hannah, like attuning to the body and really paying attention is actually giving voice to yourself, right? You know, if you're doing work with me and you're writing it, it's a deep spiritual experience, right? Of unraveling it through words and vibration. But all these things actually can be a healing path for people.
Amazing. That's so cool to hear. I mean, having read the book and then hearing these lists, I'm just like, woo, it kind of gives me chills.
You can feel it, right? Like when you know the story, it's like, oh yeah,
it's there. It's there. Yeah. So in terms of that, allowing, I mean, I think a lot of people think that their story isn't important, or like who wants to hear about me, or, you know, what do I have to say or whatever. And so we do that thing. Same with art. I mean, I spent 11 years as an art teacher, I heard lots of people say, I'm not creative, don't have a creative bone in my body, I can't make art, whatever. And it is coming into that awareness of like, we all are everything. And it's like, it's what we feed that gets developed, and where we put our attention. And so it's so powerful. Yeah. Even just being able to make these lists and to see like, what are the different perspectives we could take, and all are welcome at the table. All are part of that greater whole. And I think the anxiety, if we come back to that, comes in a lot when we get really attached to one story or one part of that, and being like, this defines, and the pushing away. So coming back to that idea too, that we're saying like, this isn't welcome, or I'm not supposed to feel this way, or
there's two there's two things going on there. There's pushing away and there's being stuck. So we actually don't want to be in either of those. We want to be in rhythm and flow. So one of my greatest learnings from my entire life experience is like being in rhythm, right? My childhood taught me to be in rhythm. We don't know how to be in rhythm in the world, right? No. But we're learning, and it's through these connections and through these conversations and through story and through art and through entrepreneurship and through the valuing and the honoring of yourself, right? That all this really can come into awareness for you.
Yes. Right? And I love that you just said rhythm, because that is really the key for our nervous systems. Like we can have lots and lots and lots of different techniques, but rhythm, if we just look at the big umbrella of rhythm and living with a rhythm that is aligned with nature. So, you know, we're waking up before sunrise, we're eating meals at the same time each day, we are going to bed at the same time each day, we are having a rhythm to how much we're letting news into it, right? We're not listening to news all day long and being bombarded with war and suffering. And yes, those things are going on. We don't want to bury our heads in the ground, but we also want to recognize that the rhythm of our nervous systems, we don't want to be watching scary movies right before we go to sleep. We don't want to be, you know, on adrenaline overload all the time. So we need the rhythm of like, when can we receive the hard things and digest them and then move on, so that we have a rhythm. And so there's so many tools from Ayurveda which originate from the teachings of the natural world that allow that. And the rhythm is the key. It is. Like we come back to that.
And the same thing with writing. So that's basically the alchemy that I lead people through, is to discover their rhythm. Like, you know, writing is it can be such a struggle, such a hard thing. And this is why a lot of people don't feel like, well, writing my story, that's just too big, or, you know, it's too much for them to really jump into, right? But it's because they don't understand that you can develop this rhythm and be in a relationship with yourself as a writer, and you can develop rhythm on the page, right? I mean, I write poetry just constantly because that's like, I just drop into rhythm, right? So we're kind of teaching similar things. I think that's why
Yes.
I like you so much, Hannah. I'm like, oh my God, why do I like this person so much? I'm like, she's just talking and I like her. I'm like, it's because
It's the teaching. Paths are many, truth is one, and we all have to find the teachers that resonate with us. We find the paths that resonate with us. But that ultimate truth is one, So
right.
all of us are headed to that same mountaintop, but we're taking different paths. And that's awesome because we're all designed to engage with that truth differently. I can't believe that we are towards the end of our
Yeah. Oh
time,
my
but
gosh,
I
it
know
goes
that
by
you
so
have a
fast.
poem. Yes. Can you share your poem with us?
Yes. I'm going to pull it up.
Close
Give
our
me a
interview
second.
today.
Give me a second and I'll pull it up. So, yeah, rhythm. Wow. Poetry is my rhythm. It's like, this is how I just find myself every day, is getting into the poem,
That's
So,
awesome. I have a poem too that's from an ancient um, Sanskrit translation that fits our conversation. So maybe we can both. Do you want me to share mine and then you'll share yours?
yeah, perfect. Go ahead. I got
Okay.
it now, but
So
go
this
ahead.
is ancient. I'm trying to see. This is from um, the 4th century AD, Sanskrit poem by Kalidasa. So this gets at this idea, or a lot of the ideas we talked about today. Look to this day, for it is life, the very breath of life. It is in its brief course lie all the realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is only a dream, and tomorrow is but a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. So our past nourishing us, the future can expand in hope.
Absolutely.
And here we are.
And that's like bringing us into the present moment, I feel like, which is one of the reasons that I love writing, is that it brings us to the present moment, right? So I just felt that through that poem. I'm going to read something that I wrote yesterday, and I don't like to interpret the poetry, right? Because we are gifting this expression for each person to self-interpret it, right? So here we go. Sister Rain, I feel your pain coming down like the sound of my own tears. I watched you all these years. Come into your own. Let your heart be known. Beyond the shadow, beyond the fear. One thing is clear. You're walking in the fire of your own flame. Calling out the name of grace. I see her face, Sister Rain. Let that pain roll off your back. Let that light come take her place inside the walls of the human race and her struggle. You taught me, oh, how you taught me, Sister Rain, walking inside the pain. Sister Rain.
Yeah, I love it. Just like we have all the capacity for everything within each of us, all the emotions, and nature has all of its expressions too.
And we're meant to connect to it. So I'm a big believer in talking about pain openly, right? Instead, because we're running from it so frequently. Either we're running from it from a painful experience in the past, or we're already preparing ourselves to run from it now.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, stop.
Yeah.
You can actually experience the pain. And if you actually feel it, right, you can then move through it. That's when you actually move through it. And it doesn't create anxiety. Right. And that's why I needed to write that yesterday, because I was having an experience that was like, oh gosh, it's coming on me. And I was just actually crying. And it's like all the stuff in the world and missing my fiance and just all these different things culminating. And that can either turn into anxiety, right? Or I can embrace it and let the floodgates go. And that's what I do often when I write something like that.
Yeah. So, awesome. Yeah. I tell my clients that crying is a superpower.
Yeah.
It's so cleansing, and lots of us need to do more of it. It's
That's true,
helpful.
Hannah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here, Chloe. It's wonderful to talk with you again, and thanks for sharing your beautiful wisdom. I want to go make my list of light and dark
I
now,
would love
and
to
I
see it.
encourage
Like if
others
you
to.
share it in the group, that would be awesome. And if other people want to connect with me, just send me a message on Messenger on Facebook, or, if people would like to do this exercise and share it with me and connect with me. And if they have any whisper of, telling their story at some point, reach out. Don't be
Oh,
afraid
and
to
you have a
connect.
retreat. Tell us real quick about your retreat.
Yeah, well, so I host a fall retreat for aspiring writers. So people can be totally new to the experience, or they can be already working on a piece of work. And it's a 5-night, 6-day retreat in this really special sacred mountain place in Truchas, New Mexico, which, if you're not familiar with New Mexico, it's outside of Santa Fe, which is a pretty famous little town here.
Beautiful.
But it's just connect with me. My retreats are all about this whole experience and how we ground it with using nature. Actually, I take people into, my retreat centers are always in nature, in beautiful settings, so that we can find the rhythm. We can get outside of the chaos and find the rhythm, Hannah. So yeah, I'd love to connect with people further about any of this.
Yeah. Well, feel free to post your links with this interview in the Facebook group. I know you're here. You're a member of the Facebook group. So feel free to share your info if folks want to connect. Thanks again for being here. It's wonderful to connect with you. Thanks for the medicine you share in the world. All right. Take care. Bye.